Ladies and gentlemen, in terms of thickness, the Oppo Find N5 has officially been dethroned because Honor has fully unveiled the Honor Magic V5. Let's take a look at some imagery here and go over what we now know are the official specifications. This is the device here, and it does look very, very similar to the Honor Magic V3, which is not necessarily a bad thing. That was a perfectly solid looking phone. I love this color, this design. I think it's like a faux leather back, really, really nice looking. But the thing that you're going to notice is just how insanely thin this thing is. We zoom in on this image, you can see that the camera bump is basically as thick. It might actually be thicker than the phone itself. When it's open, it's 4.1 millimeters. Now, the Oppo Find N5 is supposed to be measured at 4.2 millimeters. So yes, indeed, this is a little bit thinner than that. When it's closed, they're saying that it's 8.8 millimeters. Now, obviously, 4.1 times 2 is not 8.8. What that tells me is we can kind of figure out how thick the bezels are. And I'm not meaning like how thick they are. I'm meaning how thick they are, right? Not how wide, but actually how thick. Because all of these phones have bezels that stick up just a little bit so that when you close them, the screen doesn't end up basically touching itself when it's folded over. So again, 4.1 times 2, that would be 8.2. So we have to get about 0.6 made up for. So those bezels probably protrude about 0.3 of a millimeter. So if you measure it with a caliper, this one's probably going to measure out around 4.4 millimeters, and this one's around 4.5, 4.6, something in that general ballpark. Either way, I digress. It is extremely impressive, but that camera bump is huge. You can kind of see why Oppo went a different way. They shrunk their camera hardware down, downgrading the camera hardware in some ways to avoid having that giant camera mountain. Honor did not go that route. They kept the camera hardware very impressive. We'll jump ahead to that really quickly just because I already brought it up. So the primary wide-angle camera is the same 50 megapixel sensor from last year. No problem there. The ultra-wide is a new 50 megapixel sensor, which is an upgrade from the 40 megapixel sensor we got last year. I don't know exactly what size these sensors are, but they look like they've got to be fairly large. But then I think, to me, the most impressive thing that I cannot wait to see samples from, the telephoto, is a 64 megapixel 1/2 inch sensor. This is a fairly large telephoto sensor, 64 megapixels, high resolution. This thing ought to be able to zoom like crazy. Now, best I can tell, this is going to be something like a 3x optical zoom, and I really, really like this approach. The first time I really got to experience it was with the OnePlus Open, but also now with the Oppo Find N5. Having a relatively high resolution and relatively large 3x telephoto zoom camera kind of is like best bang for your buck territory for me, because you end up having the system where, 1x is good, 2x is a digital crop on your primary, that's going to be absolutely fine. Then you get your 3x, but because it's so large and because it's such high resolution, you can push that thing up to not just 3, but 6, 7, 8, 9, 10x zoom and still look really quite sharp. So again, when we look at this and we talk about it being a 1/2 inch sensor, 64 megapixels, that's going to be around 3x optical zoom, this camera setup looks like it's going to be absolutely outstanding. And again, it better be with the way that it sticks out of the back of this device. Let's double back to some of these other details. I mentioned 4.1 millimeters when open, 8.2 millimeters when it is closed. It's going to be around 217 grams, which is right in the ballpark of, something like my Galaxy S25 Ultra. So I think that's perfectly reasonable in terms of a weight for this device. When we talk about the internals, things are pretty impressive there too, guys. Last time with the Magic V3, it was a 5150 milliamp hour battery, but this time they're going even bigger. It's a little bit strange here because apparently it matters on the region. The Chinese model is going to be a 6100 milliamp hour silicon carbon battery. That's insane for this device. But then in international markets, when that does become a thing here a little bit later on, it's going to be a 5820 milliamp hour battery. I'm not exactly sure why that is the case. Did they have to use different technology? I'm not really sure what's going on there. Regardless, 66 watt wired charging, 50 watt wireless charging. Absolutely insane. Snapdragon 8 Elite, 12 or 16 gigs of RAM, up to 1 terabyte of storage. And we're going from IPX8 for your dust and water resistance with the V3, which is basically to say there's no dust resistance of any kind, up to IP58 and 59. Really important to note that it's IP58 because that is actually low-level dust resistance. When you see these foldables be IP46, 48, whatever it might be, 4 means you're protected against objects that are 1 millimeter across. That's not dust, that's actually quite large. So this is true low-level dust resistance, which is really, really cool to see. 6.43-inch cover display, a 7.95-inch inner display, so right there in the same range as something like the OnePlus Open. Now, they're actually claiming 5,000 nits of peak brightness on the inner display and on the cover display. And I would bet pretty good money that no one will ever be able to independently verify that number. You're not going to go outside and this thing's just going to be like unbelievably bright. I'm sure that it'll be perfectly fine, but a lot of the time you get these numbers and it's like, okay, in a very particular scenario with HDR, with most of the rest of the screen completely blacked out, there's like a cluster of pixels that could maybe hit 5,000 nits of peak brightness. But don't look at that and go, oh my lord, this thing's gonna be like crazy brighter than like the Galaxy Z Fold 7 or something like that. I bet once these things are in people's hands and you go outside and compare them side by side, it's probably not actually going to be very different at all. But I do think it'll probably be just fine. And last but not least, you can see the prices here on the screen. The 12 gig of RAM, 256 gigs of ROM variant is going to run you the equivalent of right around $1,255. Now, keep in mind that doesn't mean you're going to be able to go on honor.com and buy this thing for $1,300. It will be more than that when you actually do go and import the thing. But nonetheless, those are our prices. There should be a global variant at some point in the future. Usually it's like a couple of months away, so I would expect that to be probably the case with this device as well. And then you'll be able to go to different carriers or websites, I should say, like Average Dad Tech or Wanda Mobile, different places, and actually import the thing over. All that added up, this is a very, very impressive device. Extremely thin, massive battery, no compromises on the camera. The software, I'm not really familiar with Honor software. I've heard good things. I've heard that it's coming along and that it's getting better and better. And if the price on importing is right, this could be a pretty interesting possible foldable for a lot of people to take a look at. Let me know what you think in those comments down below. Is this a device that you're keeping a close eye on? As the Z Fold 7 is right around the corner, will it be thinner than 4.1 millimeters? Rumors are it could be as thin as 3.9. How crazy would that be to see Samsung actually take that crown? Lots of fun conversation to be had in the comments down below. Thanks for watching. Subscribe for more content like this, and until next time, stay nerdy, my friends.